Now, the information on this slide, this is what's commonly called the historical Jesus. In other words, when we look at different documents, and at the bottom of the slide, right, different documents, different historical resources, including writings from the Jewish historian Josephus, as well as recordings from the Sanhedrin, as we can find in the Talmud, as well as in Roman documents from Tacitus, as well as this gentleman here. This is, when we compile all of them, this is what we see about Jesus. So this is what we know about Jesus outside of the New Testament, the historical Jesus, right? So you can go through and read all these different things. And an important thing to be aware of is that Jesus of Nazareth called himself the Son of Man, yet likely never identified himself as the Christ or the Son of God. A lot of people think that Christ is Jesus' last name, which is not. He didn't walk around, people didn't walk up to him and say, "Oh, hi, Mr. Christ." People back then, last names, surnames really weren't needed, often associated with where you were from. So Jesus of Nazareth, right? So the title of being called Christ, Son of God, happened after his death, right? That happened after, when his followers attached that to him. Another neat thing about Jesus of Nazareth that not many people know, if you go through and you read, right, the New Testament, and you look at what Jesus said, what he taught, he never sought to establish a church based upon his teachings, right? Jesus never said to do what we do today. We don't get that from the historical Jesus, right? Now, the disciples had an experience with the resurrected Jesus that changed their lives. Now, people who say that Jesus never existed are ignorant. And what that means is that they're not aware of these different historical sources. Jesus was a real person, just like the Buddha was, just like the Prophet Muhammad was. Just a real person, just like I am, just like you are. Now, a lot of people say that Jesus of Nazareth was not resurrected. My position, right? It doesn't matter whether or not he was resurrected. Reason being, his disciples, right, were convinced that they had an experience with the resurrected Jesus that changed their lives. And then we have 11 illiterate men who go forth and spread the teachings of Jesus and changed the world. Today, Christianity is the world's largest religion. It goes from 11 illiterate men in backwater province of the Roman Empire to rise and become the world's #1 most prominent religion. It's a fantastic story. So now, after the death of Jesus, we have two main figures who lead in the early church. Simon, who Jesus renames as Peter, he becomes an apostle to the Jews. And then Saul, who's renamed Paul by Jesus, becomes apostle to the Gentiles. Now, if you are not born Jewish, then you are a Gentile. For example, I am a Gentile because my mom's not Jewish. So those are the two apostles and the two distinctions that we see. Now, when Simon Peter, took the message to the Jews resisted it. They pushed back on it. So as a result, Peter's role in the early church and his influence starts to lessen over time, because the Jews weren't interested, for the most part, in converting to Christianity. However, with Paul, when he took that message to the Gentiles, he was very successful. Paul was a former Pharisee, which is a Jewish leader. Those were the Jewish leaders that Jesus was reacting against and had a lot of conflict with. Paul traveled throughout Asia Minor, which is present-day Turkey, as well as Greece and Macedonia. Now, because of his great success with the Gentiles, as Peter's role and influence goes down because he's not successful with the Jewish people, Paul increases in stature and becomes more and more influential. And people say, hey, Mr. K, how influential is the Apostle Paul to Christianity? He's regarded by many as the second founder of Christianity. And a lot of the things that Christians do today, how we organize our churches, how we conduct services and so forth, we get from the writings of Paul. There's 27 books in the New Testament. Guess how many of those 27 Jesus wrote? 0. Jesus didn't write anything in the New Testament. But 13, almost half of the New Testament is attributed to Paul, which is amazing. So that's how Saul, the former Pharisee, renamed Paul by Jesus, becomes so influential, is that the gospel message really took fire with the Gentiles. Now, as Paul was starting to work his way through Asia Minor and Greece and Macedonia, right, and Christianity started to spread, it was regarded as a dangerous cult. Yes, a lot of people don't know this. Reason being is that the Romans heard that these early Christians did some really weird stuff, that they would eat the flesh of the risen Jesus and drink his blood. And they were like, wow, plus they worshiped this man that rose from the dead. So the Romans were like, man, we can't have these zombie worshipers going around eating flesh and drinking blood. In addition, the early Christians, just like the Jews, were disloyal to the empire, especially the emperor. They refused to worship him. They refused to make sacrifices to the statues of the emperor, and they refused to eat meat that was sacrificed to the statues of the emperor. So this is bad stuff that was going on, right? So the Romans started to persecute the early Christians, right? This is an example of a mosaic, right? They would take the Christians, throw them into the Colosseum, and let the wild beasts, eat them, let gladiators kill them, all for good sport. Now, in 313 CE, something amazing happened. The Emperor Constantine, on the eve of battle, had a vision. He looked up into the sun, and he saw a cross when he looked up into the sun. So he told all of his soldiers to paint a cross on their shield. And then they went into battle, and guess what? They won. So Constantine became a Christian, and he ends the persecution of the Christians. So in 313, right, we have a Roman emperor become a Christian, and the persecution stops. So what happens next? The next significant year is 380. There's a Roman emperor, Theodosius I, who's not only a Christian, But he sets up a decree that makes Christianity the official religion of the empire, and then the tables are turned, so then they start to persecute people who are not Christians. And what's the big deal here, y'all? Right? If we think about the timeline, Jesus died roughly, 30 Common Era. So in ballpark 350 years, Christianity goes from being a persecuted religion to being the official religion of the largest empire in the world, which is just a part of the just amazing story here.